Once you have Harmony installed and launch it, it will bring you to the welcome screen. In the welcome screen, you are able to create a scene or open an existing scene. So if you have projects you've worked on before, you can select it off the list or click open and navigate to it. Otherwise, you provide a name, you choose where it's going to go, you choose the camera size, whether you want to do standard HD, you want to do 4K, you can put in a custom resolution, your frame rate, and your field of view. So these are the default settings on it right now. And with that, I'm going to click on create a scene. You'll notice it did create a new scene folder on my desktop, and that is where it's going to live. Now, a little bit about the user interface here. I've returned the windows to their default configuration, but a lot of the tools that are visible may or may not be visible on your setup. And that's because when we are on a window toolbar, if I right click while I am up there, it gives me an option to add additional items to this. So then I can go and choose things. So like right here, it shows me that I have file, tools, deformation coordinate, and advanced animation. So if I turn off coordinate, all those numbers go away. So we're able to put things, and now I could add it to this window over here if I wanted, or not. So we have a lot of options of which tools appear on our different toolbars. We have options for which windows are currently available. So I have a number of windows that I've added. And if I click on the plus, I can see these are windows that I can add. These are all windows that would be under our window pull-down menu. I have access to those because I've been working in Harmony for a while now. So my user interface in Harmony has been tweaked a little bit to better support what I want while I am working. So as you're following along, if you see something there that's not present on yours, don't worry about it. But if you wish to try and find something, you can send me a message and I can help identify what is or is not there for you. So in my main window area here, this is going to be my camera view. This is what I see. And if I zoom out, we can see this little black line that indicates this is our stage. This is where the action is going to take place. On the left, I have my content creation tools, my paintbrush and pencil and eraser and paint bucket. So I have access to those tools. Down at the bottom, I have my timeline, which we'll go into the timeline a little bit later. Then I have under my tool properties, I can see I have options for the tools. So here is a brush. I can go through the list and see that I have options for additional brushes. Quite a few options are available there. And if I double click on a brush, it pulls up the brush properties, and you can see how I can modify those as well. So something that can be useful while we're working here is I can modify my maximum and minimum size. Currently it doesn't have a lot of variety, but I can move up my maximum size, I can move up the minimum size, I can make the minimum size really small. So if I want it to taper a lot while I draw, move the maximum up, and I'm like, okay, that's not very big, but now if I draw, we can see it's now able to capture that. Now, a cool shortcut inside of Harmony is to adjust the size of your brush. It's different than, say, working in Photoshop. As I hold down the letter O, and now I can click and drag to make my brush bigger. Hold down O, and I can pull it down and make it smaller. Now, I wonder these weren't quite working how I wanted. I wanted to get a more taper brush. I mixed up my minimum and maximum, so now I am working on a drawing display. So I have a stylus that I'm drawing directly on my screen. You can use a tablet, or If I work with the mouse, it doesn't have that pressure sensitivity, so my line doesn't have a minimum or maximum. So this is creating lines with the mouse, so they are of a consistent size. So you can decide, what works for you. If you have access to a tablet right now, they're absolutely fantastic when you are creating any type of digital art and animating. But there are plenty of people who do it all simply with the mouse, and they've made it work for them. The pencil tool is just like the brush tool. Let me just get rid of everything there. I can look at the pencil, so I have my maximum and minimum options there. And then we can also turn on smoothing. So if I pull up my maximum size a little bit and start drawing, we can see I finish and it smooths it a little bit. Now if I pull that way up, we can see that really smooths it. Having some amount of smoothing, I find somewhere in that 15 to 20 works nice, because if your hand is a little bit shaky while you draw, and that really comes into play when you are drawing with the mouse, it can help to smooth out your lines. So your straight lines are straighter, your curved lines have a nicer, more elegant or aesthetic curve to them. So I really do like the centerline smoothing because it cleans up my pencil marks. But the pencil and the brush work very much in a similar manner. And the eraser is also just another brush. So let's, I guess, draw something. Grab the eraser, and the eraser I can and make it bigger or smaller, and it works the same way. So pencil, brush, eraser, these are the common creation tools that you are going to use while you are working inside of Harmony. But as we make something, as we work with it, as we draw, we'll see that there's colors over here. Now those colors are all kind of meh and ugly. I want to customize the colors, so if I click on plus to create a new color, now the default view, it looks like this. I like the multiple wheel mode. I use that while I'm working, but the default will come into the single view. So now I can go and choose a color that I am looking for. So if I choose a color here, and then I can give it a name like that, I can close this. Now if I draw, we can see it's drawing with that color. And if I want to make another new color, click plus, and create that color. So now if I use, say, the paintbrush and work with that color. Now by default, the artwork that we are creating inside of Harmony is going to be vector. So it's the same kind of artwork that we make in Adobe Illustrator. So it's a similar kind of option that way. So if I go and select something like this, now I can click here and select it, and now I can move that. We can see how it's not, I grabbed a handle. It's hard to grab just lines, it's easier to grab shapes. So if you notice, when I drew, each one of these lines it looked like they were all together, but as we can see right now, they are indeed separate. So each pen or pencil mark that I made is separate. So if I were to draw like this, so it looks like I'm just filling it in, each stroke until I pick up my pen is a single individual item that can then be manipulated or worked with. So paintbrush strokes are shapes. So when we click on the shape, we can see it has handles or points on it that are modifiable. And paintbrush strokes are shapes. And a pencil, when we work with it, I'm just going to make my pencil, well, I tried to hit O and I hit P. So there's my pencil line, and now when I click on it, we can see there is my pencil line. I'm not quite sure what happened there, but we can see it now. The pencil line is not a shape like this is, but instead the pencil line is just a line that has a stroke applied to it. So it is now a stroke, it's not a line. So we're able to adjust these items based on what tool we used with them, but they are vector. So when we look at them on our screen, they look pretty good. If I were to make something bigger or smaller, it will maintain its detail or resolution because it is, by the nature of being vector, it's resolution independent. Now, a quick word about colors. Anytime you use a color inside of Harmony, so if I select that, I'll turn that to red, select this, make that piece blue. Anytime I use a color in Harmony, it associates it with that color swatch. And what that means is if I go and update that color, let's say I don't like that teal and I want to make it a little more kind of bluish turquoise, you can see it changed everywhere that I drew with it. So we can now modify that color. If I go into purple and modify it, you can see how it is changing every instance of that. Now, you may think that, wow, that's kind of a pain, but the reality is this allows for consistency across the duration or frames of an animation, because when we're animating, we're not creating one drawing, but instead we are creating multiple drawings, 24 drawings per second of animation. So that means if I want to tweak that color across my whole animation, all I have to do is modify that swatch and every frame in my animation is updated. Now, programs like Adobe Flash, which was used for doing vector animation quite heavily in the 2000s and even 2010 to 2020, when Adobe Flash is used, if I want to recolor something, if I change the color, say like on a character's shirt, I have to go and change it on each frame it appears in my entire animation. And at 24 frames per second, that's a lot of changes versus just changing a simple color swatch. So for production work, this is a much better option. So when I have a shape, if I have an area that I'm working with, and I'm just going to go back and just choose black, and let me just make this a little smaller. So now I have a shape and I'm going to draw a similar shape like this. Now let's say I want to fill that with my kind of reddish purple. So I grab the paint bucket, I grab a color, I click, it fills it, but now I click here and nothing happened. Now, one thing about the paint bucket is the paint bucket requires a continuous area, a closed area to fill. So if we look at the first box I drew, we can see how it closes. The path, and I just turned on view paths with the letter K on my keyboard. There's a lot of keyboard shortcuts inside of Harmony, and then there's a lot of little buttons that we click on. And for a long time, it always puzzled me. It's like, why do I have so many things that are just clickable? Until I really started working in Harmony and realized most of the time you're working in Harmony, you're drawing with a stylus. And when you're doing that, that means one hand is on the screen, so it's much easier just to click on something with that stylus than it is to try and use a keyboard shortcut. So it made more sense when I understood that logic. If I look at this path, I can see it's completely enclosed. This path, there's a gap here. So that gap means it's not closed, so if I try and fill it, it's not going to fill. Now, a few other shortcuts that are nice. When we're in the camera view, if I hold down spacebar, I get the hand, which allows me to move it around. That is the same shortcut as in Photoshop and Illustrator, so that's handy. So this isn't closed, but now if I go and take this point, I'm going to stretch it over, get it really tight. Let's turn off K, so it looks closed. Let's see, does it fill? Okay, yeah, it filled. Part of it is because under our options here we had close small gap. Now if I go to don't close the gap and try and go, now the paint bucket is failing. So I'm in my tool properties. If I say close gap, that looks pretty, yeah, so it's pretty tight when we look here. Yeah, so it closed that gap to fill it. But now if that gap is a little bit bigger, so we can see a little bit of daylight through there. Looks like it got a little snap turned on because it's popping over. Edit, drawing. So I have some snap turned on in my tool here. So snapping, that's why it was jumping over. So now if I go, now we can see it's very, I can get very close. It looks pretty closed. Now if I go back to my paint bucket and try and that's closed enough for a close small gap. But if I have no close, then it won't work on it. So it's pretty common when drawing to draw things and you think you're closed, but you're not quite. And then when you try and fill with the paint bucket, it doesn't always work. So if you have no close gap turned on, that will very quickly tell you, where you're like, yeah, I think I'm close there. And then see the paint bucket, okay, so my line did join. So then it closed it. So if you're trying to fill and your paint bucket doesn't work, if you zoom in and then grab the contour editor, which is the white arrow, which is the same color arrow that we would use in Illustrator for modifying a path, you can see how I can now grab the handle on this path. Now that's the point, and then now these are control handles which control the curvature or bend on these points. And we can always modify them afterward, because again, these are Bezier, I hit the button on my stylus. These are Bezier curves, so because of that, yeah, so I hit the button, which is the same as right clicking, so I don't have to pick up a mouse to right click. So these are Bezier curves that have handles that I can grab, that I can adjust to move things around. So when we're drawing, we can use the pen, so we can use the paintbrush, use the paint bucket. These are really the dominant tools that you are going to use. You can customize your colors over in your color window for it to set things up, and then that's going to allow you to create content. Spacebar allows you to move around, or you can go grab the hand tool and do that, but spacebar is a pretty common way to do it. Now to zoom in and out on your view, if you have a mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out, and that works. If your view gets really wonky, or too far in, too far out, you can't find where you want, and you just want to reset it, the Shift key and the letter M will reset your view, getting it back in view. You can also use on the keyboard, when you're in the camera view, or other views that you can zoom in and out, such as even your timeline, is the number 1 and the number 2, whether on the keypad or just your standard numbers. So 1 zooms out, 2 zooms in. So not Command plus, Command minus like a lot of Adobe programs, but number 1 and number 2, zoom in and out, Shift M will reset it to 100% on your view. So these are common ways that you can adjust your view. Otherwise, you can also go zoom in and out, and you will see that they are there. So that's how we can get started doing some basic work. We can use tools to create content. We can colorize it. We can adjust our view. We can center our view while we are working. And all of that allows us to begin the process for animation. So starting with a clean screen, if I want to start animating something, so if I just draw a simple ball and want to animate this. Now, in our timeline, we have layers and then we have frames. These frames represent moments in time. So as we look at it, this is frame 1. Now we're out, there's frame 24. So that's 1 second of time. So to see how these advance, so one common way that we can animate is to redraw our artwork each frame. Now, it gets a little bit tricky. If I'm like, okay, where was that? I think it was somewhere about here. Let's see, now I can move this. This is now my playback head, or as it's called in Adobe programs, it's our current time indicator. This is more of a current frame indicator, so you can see frame 1, frame 2. Okay, that's a lot of movement over 1/24th of a second. Now if I move to the next frame, I just advance to the next frame with that. So as I move on to that next frame, and if I want to, I can use comma and period on the keyboard. So we can move comma and period back and forth, and that's useful. But a common thing that animators have is called onion skinning. That allows us to see what's on the prior frame or even the frame ahead. So I can now see I have my artwork. So now if I want to only move just a little bit, I can redraw it. Now I advance to the next frame, redraw it. Move to the next frame, redraw it. Whoop. Now what's really important when we're animating is it's really about timing. How much time passes and how much change occurs over that time. So at the end of the day, animation really is a function of change over time. If we get a lot of change over a little bit of time, we have very fast motion. And if we have very little change over time, we have very slow motion. So right now, as I have drawn a ½ second worth of animation, I'll turn off onion skinning. And now we can see that change happening. Now with this, what I can do is I can go to the very end. I'm just going to click stop, and that puts a loop at the end here. And I'm going to hit my playback button. I'll hit play. Now we can see how it moves very quickly and then slower. Change over time. Now if I click the little loop here, that will allow it to then keep looping on playback so I can see my animation. So while you're working, it's going to be really important for you to continually be testing and checking, are you moving the amount you want each frame? Are you moving too much? Are you moving too little? As we start advancing the animation, because as we do this, what we're trying to do is to figure out what is or is not. Now I'm going to click on stop, and that now puts my stop on my current last frame, and now I'll hit play, and we can see how a little bit of movement or a lot of movement or change per frame can have a very big impact on the end result. So when we're trying to animate, we need to figure out how much or how little to move each frame. Now, what you may find is you do it and you're like, yeah, gee, I really wish I had something in between there so it wasn't such a big jump. Well, the nice part about working in Harmony is I can just click and drag and highlight those frames. I can just move them over. Now I can go to this frame here and I'm going to say create an empty drawing. Now when I do that, if I click off and move my playback head, we'll see there's now a frame here, there's a frame here, but in between there is no artwork. If I turn off onion skinning, it goes away. So now what I can do is I can add an additional drawing in between. So now when I play it, it doesn't jump quite as quick. It's a little bit smoother on that transition. Oh, and I forgot to adjust my endpoint so it can go all the way up. So eventually over time you're like, okay, let's put some of these things in, let's get it animating. And if I look at what a rendered frame looks like, currently we're in what's called the WebGL view, but if I go into my rendered view, we'll see that, oh wait, it's black. My artwork's there, but I can't see it because it's effectively on a black or transparent background. So we need to add in a background. Well, we have one drawing layer here, but we can have as many layers as we want. So if I click on the plus, we'll see that there's a lot of other options here. We can add another drawing layer, but we can also add a color card. And in case you're thinking they spelled color wrong, this is the French spelling of color because Toon Boom comes from a Canadian company out of Quebec and they speak French. So some of their coloring or naming conventions, such as color, follow that type of structure. So if I add in a color card, by default it comes in as white. Now, if I look at my rendered view, and I'm showing you the render view here because sometimes you'll accidentally click on that, and if you don't have a color card, so if I click the little eyeballs here and turn it off, you don't have a color card, like, oh crap, everything went black, where'd it go, and I'm lost. Well, you just got to get back into your your WebGL view, because now if I'm in the render view, it doesn't actually, even if we had the color card, it's not going to play correctly. It just plays on whatever the current frame was. So we can click to a specific frame when we're in the render view, but otherwise we can't watch our timeline playback. So we need to be in the GL view to make it work. Turn off onion skinning if you just want to see clean artwork. But the color card default is white. If you want to change the color, double click on the little star next to it, and you can manually enter in RGB color values if you know them. But you can also then click on just this white and choose a different color off of the list. So now I can go and choose that color. It's a little close to one of the colors we have, so I'll choose that. And back to the drawing, I don't see those squares. If I go to my render view, there it is. So we're able to add in some frames here. We can add an additional one, so if we need to move this over, we can move these over, and then currently what that's doing is that is now making that drawing. And if I zoom in a little bit on it, so you can see each one of these squares, that represents a frame. And as we go through each frame, now this frame is double because we don't see that line between it. So the current drawing that's being viewed is drawing number 13, then we have drawing 14, this is drawing 12. This is now like drawing 25 because we drew that after. But if I want to add in an in-between drawing, click on something, click Insert Empty Drawing. We'll see now that's drawing number 26. And the names of the drawings don't really matter until we start doing more complex kinds of things. So now you can see the red line, we can see the green line. So if I just put something similar in between, so it just has a little, probably not the best choice there, but it has a little bit of action or activity. And increase my stop out by 1 frame, so then that matches. Now if I want to add in another drawing layer, I can do it one of 2 ways. I can click on the plus and choose drawing, but I can also, the little icon that has the red, yellow, and blue dots next to it, which they're actually circle, square, triangle, if you could zoom all the way in or had a super high res display. My drawing display is not, but I'll add a drawing layer. We'll leave it as vector, and if I leave the name as is, it will auto append it anyway. And now if I choose add and close, I get an additional drawing layer. So we can see here is a drawing layer. Now on this, I'm just going to add something here. Now let me just move out of frame. So we're able to add to our existing drawings. Now if we hit play, we can see, so we can have more than 1 layer. Now could I have drawn those all in the same layer? Absolutely, but sometimes it's a little bit easier knowing that then on my drawing layer that, you know, I think I want to fill it, so I'll go grab my paint bucket, and now we can start filling. Oh, got to get to the layer that has the shape, and I can start filling it. There are some options that would allow us to fill across frames, but because there are, like right in here, I could probably fill across a number of frames in a single click, but we don't have that many frames, so it's easy enough to do it this way. But as you can see, we're quite handily able to create a simple animation. Now as we work with this and you extend your animation out, and I'm going to zoom back out on my timeline here to the normal size. If we want to make our scene longer, when we can see more frames in the timeline, I can simply just drag the endpoint out for my scene, and I can drag it over to here. Now if I, oh, let me try again. Drag it to here and my scene's only that long, and you're like, okay, that's what my current scene is now. But if I drag that back out, those drawings didn't go away, so that's a nice feature. But if I want to adjust my scene length to say make it 120 frames long, I can just drag it out to here, or I can put it at 79. Scene pull down menu, we have an option for scene length, and now I can just type in or use the arrows to move up and down, but to get up to 120, boom, now it's up to 120. If that's what I wanted for my finished project, I could extend it all the way out. Now sometimes your display might not be wide enough to show all of that, so you will end up having to scroll across over time. That's normal and fine unless you have gigantic displays. I'm working on a 22-inch, so that gives me quite a bit of real estate, which is really nice. If you only have, say, a 15-inch or 21-inch, like if you're working on a laptop, it gets to be a little bit more challenging. You do have to spend a lot more time scrubbing your timeline. So once your project is you're done with your animation. You have your layers, you have your artwork, you have your color card. If you're using one of those, your scene length is set so you don't have emptiness of nothing at the end, and you're ready to export out what you're doing. The easy way is to go under File, choose Export, and choose Movie. Now with that, I'll browse, and I'm just going to put it on the desktop by my scene, and I will call this Demo. And I could also choose which frames I want. So say I only want to export maybe a dozen or 24 frames right in the middle of a multi-hundred length scene. I can do that. I can change the resolution. So we get quite a few options available for us. So normally, we'll just go for the H.264 MPEG. That creates a smaller file than the QuickTime Movie. Those are kind of big because they're relatively uncompressed. And now I hit OK, and it renders it out. And if I minimize Harmony, we can see here it is. Movie comes up, and I can hit render. There it is. So we're able to render it out. Now your project, well, you're going to work with it. It creates a project folder. Inside that folder, it has a series of subfolders. The actual project file is the .xstage file, and it creates these little duplicate files with the little tilde after it, and that, or whatever the squiggle character is indicating because the file is open, it has those additional files in it. We have our palette library that we're working with. If we render out frames while we are working in it, doing a render and play option, they would live in that folder. We can see each one of the drawings that we created as a TVG file, and they now exist here. And if it's storing the environment that we're working with. So there's a lot of files. You don't mess with any of these. The file that is your project file is the Xstage, but if you only have that, you can't open it because you won't have any of the data that goes with your project. So if you want to move this around from one computer to another to share it with someone, or to move it from a desktop to a laptop, you want to email it, it's required that you right-click on it and choose Compress. If you're on Mac, if you're on Windows, right-click Send to Compressed Archive. And if you are going to be putting it into, say, Microsoft OneDrive, it's imperative, required, absolutely requires it to be zipped, to be stored there. You can't just say, oh, I can upload a folder and that'll work. No, it won't. It will corrupt your project, and then your project is toast, and you can't get it back. So always, if you're shipping it around, moving it from the cloud, up to the cloud, down to the cloud, zip it before you move it. If you fail to zip it, you will probably corrupt your project and it will be irrevocably trashed. You've been warned. All right. So, animating is fun. It takes time. It takes some practice to get used to. But it gives you the ability to create something from nothing. And that truly is magical.